Hello dear students, you are welcome in this video. Dear students, we are making a series on Indian knowledge system and this is yet another video in the same series. So in this video we are going to talk about the classical languages in India and how these classical languages are developed and what are the essence of these languages or what is the significance of these languages and how these languages are thrived over the years. So we'll discuss all the classical languages here in this video. So here you see that it's an introduction to classical language, and in this introduction we are going to uh, cover all the parts of classical languages one by one. So let's first understand what is classical language. It is important, without that we cannot go ahead. So classical language is nothing but a language with a large body of ancient written literature and an independent literary tradition. They are often associated with rich cultural heritage and historical significance. Now, a few things are important in this definition. A classical language is nothing but a language with large body of ancient written literature. So the focus is on ancient literature, but it must be in the form of written or oral. So though here we have the word written, but this literature also include oral literature. So here ancient written literature and an independent literary tradition. So if you look at this each classical language, you will understand that these languages or classical languages have their own tradition of literature and tradition of we can say that the poetry or drama or classical forms of art. They are often associated with a rich cultural heritage and historical significance. So these languages are not only important from the point of view of language only or the communication only, but they are important from the point of view of cultural heritage. So these languages are cultural heritage and also they include historical significance or historical text. So all these languages are important, and a classical language is nothing but an ancient language basically, which has these kind of features. Now let's start with the first classical language in India, which is Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is one of the oldest languages in the world, not only in India but in the world. Here you can see, and its roots are basically stressed from the second millennium before common era. Means now we can say that Sanskrit is old language, is an old language more than 5,000 years. So here we have second millennium means the two we can say that 4,000 years or more than 5,000 years. So this language is old. Now in Sanskrit we find that it is a liturgical language of Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism. So these three traditions or these three religions are the prominent religions in India, and this is the liturgical language. Means liturgical means the language of religion. So whatever the rituals and traditions are there in those religions, they are performed with the help of Sanskrit. So it is the language of religion or the language of rituals and traditions and cultural communication. Now let's understand some of the contributions in Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is a very rich language and has a vast and diverse we can say that literary texts, or it has diverse canons in literature. For example, we have the texts like the Vedas, then we have Upanishads, the epics like the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, then we have classical poetry, classical drama, scientific treatises, and philosophical texts, etc. So we find a vast body of literature in Sanskrit. Not only literary, but there are non-literary texts too. For example, we have historical accounts, we have scientific accounts, we also have philosophical texts in Sanskrit. So this is a very vast contribution of Sanskrit in the field of languages. Now, if we consider Sanskrit as a prominent language, we find that there is great influence on other Indian languages of Sanskrit. So, for example, we have many modern Indian languages are influenced by Sanskrit. Not only the linguistic tradition, but we find that many things are borrowed from Sanskrit. For example, we have vocabulary, grammar, the system of grammar, the script also we have so from Sanskrit. There are many languages who share their script to the Sanskrit. Then we have linguistics influence, grammatical influence, then we have mathematical influence, astronomy. So all these areas have greater influence of Sanskrit in the canon of knowledge in these particular fields. Let's move to the second language, and we have second language, Tamil. It is one of the oldest classical languages. Actually, this is a Dravidian language, or this language comes into the family of Dravidian languages, and it is one of the oldest classical language. Now, its roots, if we consider, goes back 2000 years ago, and it is primarily spoken in Tamil Nadu and some parts of Sri Lanka. So Tamil also is an important language like Sanskrit, as we find that today we have only a few people who speak Sanskrit, or we find that there is no population who use Sanskrit for their communication, but we have a larger population of Tamil who uses Tamil still today. And if we consider the contribution of Tamil language in literature, we have Sangam literature, very famous in Tamil. Then we have epics like Shilapatikaram and Mani Mekalai, and the texts of Alvars and Nayanars, etc. So these are some of the important works we find in Tamil literature, and today this language is thriving and continues to thrive and have greater literature in the same language. So modern poets, modern dramatists, modern authors, modern writers compose in Tamil. So this is the rich heritage of Tamil language, and if we consider its influence, we find that it has a rich tradition of poetry, philosophy, grammar, and still today we find all these canons are live, and people are working in the field, or people use Tamil for their communication. So this is the second classical language. Third classical language, here we have Pali. Pali also is an important language, and it is an ancient language. So if we consider Pali, so Pali also shares its roots in different ages, or in different eras. For example, it is associated with Buddhism particularly. When we think about Pali, Pali is directly we can say that attached to Buddhism, and Theravada canon of literature, Tripitaka literature is found in Pali. So if we consider its contributions, we have earliest Buddhist scriptures in Pali, then teachings of Buddha we find in Pali, we have monastic rules, philosophical treatises, and different types of texts are there in Pali language. So it is directly connected to the Buddhism. And if we consider its influence, we find that it is the liturgical language. Liturgical language means the language used in religious rituals, the language used in religious traditions. So it is used in Theravada tradition and contributed to spread of Buddhism in Southeast Asia. So this is the great contribution of Pali language, that it emphasized the spread of Buddhism in Southeast Asia. So this language is important language from the point of view of classical language, and we have a rich cultural heritage or historical heritage in Pali. Next language we have Prakrit. Now actually Prakrit is not a single language, but it is a group of middle age Indo-Aryan languages. There are many languages, and these languages are used by the then people for communication, and hence it is very important to understand this Prakrit and its canon, because this literature comes from vernacular literature or vernacular tradition of literature. So its roots we find in Sanskrit, so vernacular languages of the common people. So Prakrits are nothing but vernacular languages of the common people. Vernacular language means the language people use for their communication, and hence we find that there is a great oral tradition in Prakrit. So Prakrit literature. So if we consider its contributions, we find that Jain scriptures like Agamas, Buddhist texts, plays, poetry, Prakrit sections in Kalidasa's plays. So Prakrit is used by so many poets and saints. For example, we find that there are so many Marathi saints who also used Prakrit for their composition. For example, we have Jnaneshwari or Jnaneshwara and other poets who used Prakrit in their works. Then when we think about its influence, we find that on many modern languages the Prakrit has its influence. For example, Marathi. So Marathi has a greater influence of Prakrit and Sanskrit. Then we have literary and cultural tapestry of ancient India. If we go into the deep of Prakrit language, we find there are so many texts which were written in Prakrit, and still today we are researching on those texts and on those literary canons. So let's move to the next language, and next language is number fifth or five, Kannada. It is also a Dravidian language, and its roots are stressed in 19th century. Century common era. Actually, it is older than the 19th century, but the solid literature we found from the 19th century, and this language is spoken in Karnataka. So it is an official language of Karnataka. In contributions, we find that Kaviraj Marga is an important text in Kannada. Then we have Pampa's Vikrama Arjuna Vijaya. This is also an important text in Kannada, Vikramarjuna Vijaya. Then we have some vachanas or hymns of Basveshwara and other Kannada saints. We also have classical poetry, classical prose, philosophical texts, etc. in Kannada language. And this language also is used for the communication in Kannada. And in modern days, we have so many writers who are writing in Kannada. If we consider its influence, we find that Indian literature, philosophy, and cultural traditions in Kannada, which are contributed in the spread of the native culture or the native languages and native historical heritage. So, this is an important contribution of Kannada or its influence we find in on different types of texts. Now, the sixth language here we have Telugu. Telugu also is a Dravidian language and its history spans over a millennia. So it is also one of the oldest languages in India. So it is spoken in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. If you consider its contributions, we find that the poetry, classical poetry, is evident in Telugu. Then we have Telugu epics like Nannaya's Mahabharatam. Then we have Bhakti literature of Annamacharya and Tyagaraja in Telugu language, and Telugu language also is a language of communication in the Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. These two states use Telugu, and we have a thriving literature, and it boasts of the continuity in its canonical literature or in its generation of literature in modern days too. So, if we consider its influence, we find that it has enriched Indian literature, culture and tradition, history, etc. So, this is the Telugu, one of the classical languages in India. Actually, India is home to so many languages. We find there are several classical languages, but here only we are thinking about some major languages. Now, next we have Malayalam, and it is also a Dravidian language, and it is evolved from Tamil. Now, this is very important. So, Tamil gave birth to Malayalam, and its history also is traced back from 19th century Common Era, and it is spoken in Kerala. If we consider its contributions, we find that we have classical poetry in Malayalam, we have folk songs, we have modern literary works like Manipravalam literature, writings of Ivu Thachan and Kumaran Asan, etc. So these are modern poets or modern writers, modern authors who are composing in Malayalam. If we consider its influence, we find that it has a rich tradition of poetry, drama, prose, etc. in Malayalam, and the same texts are now translating into other languages in India, because India is home to hundreds of languages, and hence we find that the translation activity is very important, and it is at the core of all these languages or classical languages. And we have next Odia. Now, Odia is Indo-Aryan language, and its history is traced back to 10th century CE, and it is spoken in Odisha. In contribution, we find that it has classical poetry, then devotional songs. We have modern literary works, writings of Sarla Das and Jayadeva, etc. So, this is also one of the important languages spoken in Northeast, and this is a classical language. If we consider its influence, we find that it contributed to Indian culture and literature at a larger extent, particularly or especially in the southeast, in the northeast India. Now we have last language. Actually, this language is added now or in this year in the classical languages, and it is Marathi. So Marathi is evolved with Prakrit, as Prakrit is evolved in the ancient time. In the same way, at the same time, Marathi also is evolved with Prakrit, and it is a sister language to Sanskrit, because we found that Marathi has great influence of Prakrit and Sanskrit on its grammar, its linguistic tradition, etc. So it is stressed back 300 before Common Era, and it is spoken in Maharashtra, Goa, and some parts of India. It is also a very we can say that rich language with its cultural and historical heritage. In contributions we have collection of poems Gaha Sattasai by Satvahana King Hala. So it's one of the oldest texts in Marathi. Then we have Sant poets like Jnaneshwara and its Jnaneshwari. Then we have Abhangas. Then we have hymns and different types of Marathi collection of poems, collection of dramas, and collection of other literary texts in Marathi. So we have Sant Tukarama, Sant Namdeva. There are so many other sants, and it has a very rich tradition of sants, and they composed in Marathi. Actually, it is middle aged Marathi, or the Marathi spoken in middle age. We also found that in Marathi there is the combination of Prakrit also. These saints or sants used Prakrit too in their composition. So in influence we find that they hugely contributed in shaping Indian literature, traditions, culture, history, etc. So it also has great importance in the whole canon of literature, or in the whole scene of literature. So this is all about the classical languages in India. So if you have any problem, any query, you can comment below in the comment section. We'll discuss your problems or queries. Let's meet in the next video. Thank you very much.